How's it going, guys? American Maverick here again, and today we're going to be reacting to a little bit more about World War I. Now, as always, I like to introduce myself a little bit before each of my videos. I am a history major in my university right now, as well as an Army National Guardsman. And so today we're going to be watching a video by, I believe it's Simple History, so make sure you go like and subscribe to them as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe to me as well. It helps me out a ton. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Today we're going to be reacting to what sentry duty was like in World War I. Now, World War I is one of my favorite wars to cover in terms of history because of how interesting it was in the old world meeting the new world. And as you can imagine, you probably already know, conditions in the trenches, which is where soldiers usually were, was absolutely awful. And so I can only imagine that sentry duty is going to be a reflection of that awful condition. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Sentry duty, World War I. Daily life in the trenches of World War I was reduced to just a few activities. Most of the soldiers' time was spent whiling away hours and hours of boredom, waiting for either an artillery barrage or an enemy offensive. In order to break the lethargy of such a life, soldiers were given a number of duties to perform that would keep them busy: inspecting weapons and equipment, digging and repairing trenches, filling sandbags, or emptying latrines in flooded sections of the trenches. But the most important task of all was sentry duty. As stalemate was the norm for trench warfare, surprise attacks were the most advantageous way to break it. These surprise attacks were something that soldiers learned to be wary of. In order to avoid being surprised and overrun by the enemy, soldiers were engaged in the constant observation of enemy activity.
Real quick, I also got to point out
sentry duty was organized by official
the British
codes.
trench lines, and I believe the French as well, but I know the British trench lines in particular, they were notoriously poorly built. They would flood, they were just muddy. The soldiers were living in really bad conditions, while the Germans, however, during this war, the trenches that they built were very, I shouldn't say very, for what it was a lot more comfortable. They were usually dry, some even had electricity. And so the Germans, and I've always been interested, I can't find very much information about what daily life was like for German soldiers at the time, but I imagine it was considerably better in terms of quality of life than the British.
And the planning out of the smallest details. These codes defined schedules, uniforms, equipment, and the complete protocol of taking on and relieving others from their duties. But on the battlefield down in the trenches, these codes were pushed aside, as there was no room for such formalities. Depending on the unit or the situation on the front line, sentry duty was organized in shifts of 1 to 2 hours. More than 2 hours of sentry duty could cause unwanted fatigue and the risk of the sentry falling asleep. During his sentry shift, the soldier was to observe the surrounding area while standing on a specially designed fire step. The fire step was an elevated ledge made inside the trench so that the soldier could raise his head over the trench parapet to fire his weapon at the enemy. In order to stay protected, sentry posts were fortified with sandbags and layers of earth. Very often these posts had a built-in sniper shield, so sentries were able to observe no man's land through a loophole and stay protected at the same time. The sentry's main duty was to pay attention to the movement of the enemy and to warn the rest of the unit in case of an enemy attack. For this purpose, sentries were provided with a whistle. By blowing the whistle, the sentry alerted the rest of the soldiers of the incoming danger so they could coordinate their next actions. For example, 3 blows might mean that enemy soldiers were attacking from the right, 2 blows for the left, or 1 blow if they were coming straight forward. Within seconds, the soldiers knew where to run and what section of the trench to cover. Once his sentry duty was over, the soldier continued to be engaged as the relief man for the duration of the next sentry's post. During this period, he was allowed to sit down, but not to sleep, as he had to be prepared to replace the new sentry in case he was hit. Once the relief period was over, he went back to the sentry office to rest. Each unit had a different schedule, and often shifts were repeated over the course of several days. Most soldiers found it quite exhausting, describing their sentry experience as being half dead. Fatigue was considered to be one of the greatest enemies for every sentry. As life in the trenches was already tiresome, staying awake during sentry duty was a real challenge. But however difficult it was the sentry's obligation to stay awake and to perform his duty as best he could. The safety of the entire unit depended on his vigilance. For this reason, if a sentry was found asleep or
that
drunk
might
at
seem
their
a
post,
little
they were put to a court-martial.
Extreme to some people who are watching this, but also keep in mind that this individual is really responsible for the lives of the people on their left and on their right. And again, my heart goes out to him, because if you've ever been in a condition where you're not comfortable, where things aren't good, and especially where you're sleep deprived, it's just awful. And so you can't really blame them, but at the same time, you need to stay awake, you need to stay focused, and you can't have your brain inhibited by alcohol or things like that. And so during that time, you just have to suck it up. And I'm grateful I've never been in a situation like that. I've been in some pretty rough places in my life, talking about like quality of living, I guess, and I've had to eat certain things and go without sleep and go without showers, go without things like that. But I've never had somebody trying to kill me during those times. And so I'm trying to imagine those situations where I was in, but somebody trying to kill me at the same time. And that's just awful to think about.
Offense was seen as quite
And
serious.
also, sorry I'm
so
pausing
much
so much.
that it could
Also,
result
it's
in a
worth
death
pointing out that
sentence.
I believe
However,
this
on many occasions,
dated back all the way to the Roman times. Roman soldiers and Roman sentries, if they were ever found asleep or drunk in their positions, it was also a death penalty for them as well.
these sentences were replaced by lesser penalties. Military authorities wanted to make sure that the soldiers understood the importance of the sentry's role in their unit's safety. Sentry duty was not only tiring, but also very dangerous. Even though sentries were protected by various lookout fortifications, they were still more exposed than any other soldier down in the trench and were prime targets for enemy snipers. Besides the danger of sharpshooters, sentries also had to watch out for night patrols. Small enemy squads would crawl through no man's land, protected by the cover of night, until they reached the enemy trench. Their task was to get information on enemy activity, or to capture a sentry soldier and bring him back for interrogation. If captured, the sentry could expect rough treatment during the interrogation. As a defense from night patrols, German sentries were equipped with light shells. Once shot into the air, these flares fell down with small parachutes, illuminating a wide area of no man's land and exposing any enemy soldiers. Dogs could also assist those on sentry duty. With an acute sense of hearing and scent, sentry dogs gave soldiers an advance warning of approaching patrols. With a great
There's a
deal
reason
of
why
training,
we still use
these dogs
dogs
were a
today.
valuable asset
They're
for
just
every
absolutely
sentry.
amazing. The natural abilities that they have helps out any soldier. Not even just in sentry duty, and so many other things.
Even though sentry duty was considered to be boring and tiresome, it was one of the most important tasks a soldier could do. At times, they were single-handedly responsible for the safety of their entire unit. The men in the trenches could rest a little easier, knowing that they were under the watchful eye
I think that's the
of
end
the sentry.
of the video. It is. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Let's talk about this real quick before you click away. I don't really have too much to say, but I have nothing but admiration for people who would do this, especially back during this time period. I don't know, it's hard to imagine that type of warfare and that type of life, much less having to stay awake for hours on end with the threat of somebody taking your head off at any point. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. If you want me to react to any other videos, feel free to post them in the comments, and I'll see if I can't react to those as well. Again, I'm new to YouTube, and if you want to, feel free to check out my channel. I do a lot of reaction videos, as well as military-type videos, history-related videos, all sorts of stuff like that. But if you want to, like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.